Hello viewers and welcome to my blog for what has been an eventful European Grand Prix 2012. Certainly lots of action to talk about. It's always one of those on the calendar you kind of dread really. You just see one car pulling away and then that's going to be the end of it. Much like what we saw last year, the field was very split up and the teams would say, oh, well, that's kind of the way it works here. It's just that type of track. The teams have trouble staying together. Not so in 2012. But firstly, I'd just like to say get well soon to Anthony Davidson. Obviously, many of you have probably seen the horrible accident he had at Le Mans last week where he damaged two of his vertebrae and he's now going to be on his back for some time, so we'd like to wish him well. Obviously he had the interview with Georgie on Sky and it's nice to see that he's on the mend, but it's going to be a long old journey. But Anthony, get well soon from myself and behalf of everyone at VVV. Now really about the race today. Obviously great start for Sebastian Vettel. It's one of those kind of dream starts he gets so often, doesn't he, when he's in pole position. He just shoots off, flies away. Hamilton second, obviously cutting across very quickly. You'll see if you watch the replays onto Maldonado, and Maldonado almost falls back into the two Lotuses who almost come together as well, almost a triple pile up. They did very well to avoid each other through turns, say 2, 3 and 4. It's a mess of cars there everywhere. Great overtaking from the Ferraris, Button falling backwards. There were people who were lucky and people who were unlucky. It has to be said, Fernando Alonso did get very lucky actually in some of those instances there. The race early on then, obviously Sebastian Vettel pulling away, and it looked like the McLaren was going to be protecting its tyres and doing perhaps a stop less, just one stopping, something like that, or maybe even Sebastian Vettel could have done even 2 or 3 stops. He was pushing so hard on those tyres, flying away into the lead, while that was a good overtake. Obviously Grosjean was trying to overtake and obviously he managed to get past Lewis Hamilton in the end. That was vital for him and for his race, but obviously by that point Sebastian Vettel was 20 seconds down the road. And of course, while everybody eventually got to their first pit stops, Michael Schumacher was staying out there because he started the race on the harder tyres, and he caused a very entertaining train of cars behind him. A lot of action for Michael. It took all of his experience to keep everybody behind. Obviously a couple of guys Lewis Hamilton got past, but on the whole it was all about placing his car in the right places, and of course there's that strong Mercedes engine which gives them a lot of speed down the straights. So obviously Bruno Senna was caught out with an incident with Kobayashi. I have to say I always see that coming with Bruno. He's not had the sort of the cleanest record this year when it's come to instances with different cars. Obviously you would talk about Michael at Barcelona, but in Barcelona he also bumped into Romain Grosjean as well, and you see there's a lot of erratic movement in the car. It just seemed like something inevitably was going to happen there, and of course he suffered a drive-through penalty for that as well, which I thought was inevitable really. I'm sorry for Bruno Senna fans out there, but he's I think he just needs a nice, sensible, clean race at the moment. Just needs to start finishing some races on a regular basis and, not having all this contact. And I think things will really improve for him. Of course, then we've got Jean-Eric Vergne weaving into Kovalainen. Don't know what he was thinking, really. He was trying to bully Kovalainen on the inside, ended up breaking his wheel, and that, of course, ended up bringing out the safety car. Guys pitting. Problems for Lewis Hamilton in the pits again. Not much luck is he having, this time with the front jack, rather unusually, I have to say. We had 2 front jack men, both front jacks seem to have a problem. It seems like the most simple thing in the world to have a front jack that works properly, but alas no, besides problems with one of the front tyres, the front left tyre. Interesting, normally it's the rear that they had a problem with. Now with the fronts, I don't know what that is, whether it's to do with the brake temperatures or anything like that. I mean, they were talking to the Force Indias about the rear sort of brakes and the temperatures they were having there and telling him to coast into corners. Interesting to see the problems on the front of Lewis's car. However, this has all been helping Fernando Alonso, and of course he's managed to work his way up now and managed to pass Grosjean, and following the restart, the safety car resetting everybody, it was interesting to see Fernando's speed getting past Grosjean, and then he had a nice sort of clear lead ahead of him. Massa in with a puncher for his bump with Kobayashi. I missed the replay on that one, but obviously Kobayashi was seen to be the one at fault. And of course then you had a situation that I sort of stood out to me today with the marshals recovering Sebastian Vettel's car in what appeared to me a situation to be quite dangerous actually. I was surprised at the speed the cars were going past at that point. I have to say, very dangerous. Nobody likes to see that, really. I think marshals, they do risk their lives when they're doing this job. And if you've not been to a Grand Prix, when you're that close to the cars and you feel them going past, it's all right saying, oh, the drivers are in control, but there's a line between them being in control, something breaking on the car, and they're not in control, and suddenly you have a disaster on your hands. But luckily, everything moved forward there. So much to talk about today. I've had to write a lot of it down on a piece of paper. So I thought that was a bit of a ridiculous situation with marshals. I don't like to see them put in harm's way like that. Of course, Grosjean out, alternator failing. Such a shame for him today because he was doing so well and it looked like it was going to come back to him. I still don't think we saw the best from Grosjean today. I think he would have taken the race to Fernando and I think it would have been a fight to the end. Kimi closing up on Hamilton, of course, was keeping a nice eye on Hamilton, wasn't he? He was waiting for something to happen. He was waiting for the tyres to wear out on the car in front. And, of course, then we see Petrov coming together with Daniel Ricciardo, losing his front wing. A real shame for him, but it was overall an encouraging race for Caterham, despite the Caterham team have done okay. But today they were just punching a little bit higher, and you could see that in qualifying as well. Getting ahead of the Toro Rossos, a good result for them. So, Schumacher, Webber have a late stop. He manages to pass a bunch of cars. They're in 11th and 12th place. They pass Button and they work their way up the field. And you can see, obviously, at this point, Button's tyres are gone again. He has no grip. We're seeing Lewis's grip failing on his car gradually. The rear tyres fading away, and finally Kimi passes Hamilton. Of course, as he's slowing, it appears that his tyres have definitely fallen off that cliff that they refer to. But now we're talking about the Maldonado incident, which is one of the sort of main incidences of the day, it has to be said. And of course there's a clash between Maldonado and Hamilton. Quite an interesting one, really. I think there's a number of schools of thought that's going to go through. There's a lot of information that the stewards will have to look at. I think it's interesting, firstly, that Grosjean got past on the same corner without incident and Maldonado had a problem. It would be nice to see those two side by side. Looking at when they were together, they were side by side on the apex. So the actual side by side on the apex of the corner, that's one thing. And then the exit of the corner, obviously Lewis took the whole racetrack and gave Maldonado, who was beside him, his front wheel was just about in alignment with Lewis's front wheel. It's interesting to see how he pushed him off the track there. Now, this is it depends on the corner and depends on the circuit. I mean, if you take a circuit like the French Grand Prix, at the end of the long straight, you had the hairpin, and often, if you're on the outside, you get hung out to dry, you'd have to back off. That's just the style of the circuit. This corner is slightly different. Turn 12. There were a number of sort of overtakes done on that piece of the track, 12 through 13 into 14, and we saw Mark Webber achieving that as well when he had improved, or I say better tyres than some of his opposition at the end. Let's take a look at this in more detail. Okay, so obviously one of the key topics today is going to be the Maldonado Lewis Hamilton incident. I saw lots of fans there of both drivers who are not happy with the other one. It's a racing incident, unfortunately. It's one of those things. Who needs a sky pad, actually, when you've got a piece of paper, a rubbish drawing and some highlighter pens? I did my very brief drawing here just to the corner, and the key thing for me is they're going to be looking at the speed and everything else that the cars went at, but for me really is the cars were side by side at this point here. And then they have to look at where Lewis went in relation to taking his line and where Maldonado was forced into taking his line, and of course the impact and where they eventually came together. So it's going to be quite interesting to see what they felt should have happened here. There's three instances really. You've got the one which is was Maldonado pushed off the track when their front wheels were actually side by side at this point. This is the apex, give or take, and the front wheels were roughly side by side at that point. So what happened from here to the next point? Now, I think if you look at the lap earlier with Romain Grosjean, they were a similar position, and Lewis was able to keep it on the inside, and Romain was as well. So it was interesting to see how these guys weren't able to give enough room at the end there, and of course with Lewis's tyres being worn out, and that's going to be something for the marshals to discuss. But certainly an interesting topic of the day. So that's an incident we'll leave with the marshals, of course, and the stewards to discuss. But then what does that mean? That means Michael Schumacher is back on the podium. We have Fernando Alonso, who's emotional on the podium, a great result for him. We have Kimi Räikkönen, who's on the podium, not emotional, not really the result he wanted, but he was second, and result's a result, but obviously not what Kimi wanted today. You never know with Kimi when he's happy or when he's not happy. He always has the same sort of tone, it has to be said. But Michael Schumacher, back on the podium. Yeah, it's amazing. He's been driving very well this year, and I think a lot of people discounted him. I don't really know why. Man of his tremendous experience. And this year he's been very unlucky in the races. Very unlucky, it has to be said, with technical failures and with a few decisions that have gone against him, some of which I don't agree with. And it was good to see him back there today, starting his championship halfway through the season, it has to be said. Good for Brawn as well. Those guys have been working hard this year. 3 guys, all Ferrari two of them are Ferrari world champions, one of them driving for Ferrari. It has to be said, driver of the day for me has to be obviously Fernando Alonso. What a fantastic drive from him. But Michael Schumacher and Webber, they cut through the field well under trying circumstances. It's tough, obviously they had better tyres at the end there, more grip, but at the same time had to be some well-placed manoeuvres, and it all kind of fell in place for him at the end. And of course now Mark Webber has moved ahead of Sebastian Vettel in the Drivers' World Championship. Who would have thought that? Starting from 19th on the grid for Mark Webber today. Let's not forget, these guys in the top positions, apart from Kimi, all came from a long way down on a circuit where you can't traditionally overtake. So fantastic. A very unusual European Grand Prix. Valencia, of course, will be swapping with Barcelona, they're saying, in years to come. I think that's fair enough. I think both circuits have strengths and weaknesses. I think Barcelona, classically hasn't had many places to overtake. I still think they need to work on the DRS down the main straight. But Valencia with a street circuit, obviously, it's always going to be tight. It's always going to be hard to pass. But today, the guys found the option. They found grip on the outside on some of those corners, and it enabled them to make those passes. So that's it for the European Grand Prix then. We'll leave the Lewis Hamilton and Maldonado situation with the stewards, and we'll come back on that in a couple of weeks' time. And then we're on to the British Grand Prix. So it'll be interesting to see what can happen there. Can Jenson Button get his McLaren working again? Can McLaren get Jenson Button's McLaren working again? I think it's a more important question there. How will Lewis bounce back? How will Sebastian Vettel continue? Alonso's going to be strong anyway. Mercedes, they're ups and downs in their form, aren't they? Rosberg didn't have the greatest race today. We'll see how he bounces back as well. So, goodness, it's all to play for at the moment. The Pirelli tyres are messing everybody about, and with the British weather, anything can happen. And as Murray would say, it usually does. But that's it from me for now. As ever, more soon.